For 15 grueling years, the Alpha King of Iron Peak slept in an empty bed, haunted by a bloody past. He swore no woman would ever cross his threshold again. But on the coldest night of the century, a rejected, freezing Omega made a desperate mistake that rewrote history. In the year 1244 of the Moon Era, the citadel of Iron Peak stood as a brutal monument to grief. High King Roderick Sterling ruled the Lycan territories with a fist of cold iron and a heart that had long since turned to ash. 15 years prior, his mate, Queen Genevieve, was assassinated in her own chambers by rogue mercenaries from the Southern Isles. Since that night, Roderick had ordered the Queen's wing of the castle sealed, barring the heavy oak doors with iron chains. He swore an oath of celibacy before the moon goddess, a vow so absolute that even the mention of a new Luna was considered high treason within the fortress walls. He became the Stone King, a man whose wolf had retreated so deep into his psyche that many whispered it had died of a broken heart. 100 leagues away, in the prosperous but ruthless Silverpine Pack, a tragedy of a different sort was unfolding. Cora Hale, an Omega of 22 years, knelt in the freezing mud of the Pack Square. Her crime was simple, but unforgivable in the eyes of her alpha, Isaac Thorne, a lineage historically known for their vanity, unlike the noble thorns of the old texts. She had been his fated mate, discovered during the autumn equinox. But Isaac was a deeply ambitious man who had secretly brokered a marriage alliance with Lady Vivian of the affluent House Harrington. To Isaac, an Omega mate was a political death sentence, a stain on his upward mobility. I, Alpha Isaac of the Silverpine, reject you, Cora Hale, as my mate, my Luna, and my equal. Isaac's voice boomed over the gathered crowd, void of any remorse. You are stripped of the Pack name. You are stripped of our protection. May the winter claim what is no longer ours. The severing of a mate bond is a violent, agonizing tearing of the soul. Cora screamed as the invisible tether snapped, clutching her chest as blood dripped from her nose. The Pack's mark on her collarbone burned furiously before fading into a jagged, angry white scar. She was given no supplies, no horse, and only the wool cloak on her back. Exiled into the dead of winter, an Omega alone in the medieval wilderness was a guaranteed corpse. But Cora possessed a quiet, stubborn resilience that her alpha had never bothered to notice. Driven by sheer survival instinct, she walked. For 3 days and 3 nights, she trudged through the relentless blizzards of the Frostbite Mountains. She survived by eating pine nuts and melting snow on her tongue, her boots wearing thin, her toes blackening from the cold. Her only hope was to reach the neutral capital city of Oakhaven, nestled at the base of the High King's citadel, where the law dictated that any wanderer could seek sanctuary in the servants' quarters. By the time she breached the city gates, Cora was barely a ghost. The medieval streets of Oakhaven were completely deserted, the townsfolk having barred their wooden doors against the lethal freeze. Delirious, shivering so violently her teeth chipped, Cora dragged her freezing limbs up the steep cobblestone path toward the imposing silhouette of the Iron Peak citadel. She didn't know the layout of the castle. She only knew she needed to find the kitchens or the stables, anywhere with hay and residual warmth. Blinded by the snow and her own failing vision, she slipped past the main portcullis, wandering down a narrow, ivy-choked alleyway abutting the eastern wall. At the end of the stone corridor, she saw it. A heavy, arched wooden door. There were no guards stationed near it, and the stone steps leading up to it were slick with black ice. To her frozen, desperate mind, it looked like a forgotten cellar door, perhaps an old entrance to the servants' quarters. She didn't know, couldn't have known, that she had bypassed the public areas entirely. She had stumbled into the king's private, forbidden gardens, and the door she was staring at was the private entrance to King Roderick's inner sanctum. With the last ounce of strength she possessed, Cora dragged herself up the steps. She raised a bruised, trembling fist and knocked. Inside the dimly lit study, King Roderick sat at his massive oak desk, surrounded by military maps and ledgers. The fire in the hearth roared, casting long, dancing shadows across his scarred, bearded face. At 42, he was a massive, imposing figure, his broad shoulders draped in a heavy direwolf pelt. He had spent the last 15 years drowning himself in the administration of his kingdom, burying his grief beneath warfare and politics. When the faint, muffled thump echoed from the heavy garden door, Roderick froze. His hand immediately went to the hilt of the broadsword resting against his chair. No one used that door. It led only to the high, walled gardens, which had been locked since Genevieve's passing. His immediate thought was an assassin, perhaps a shadow walker, sent by the rebel factions in the east. He moved with the silent, lethal grace of an apex predator. Grasping the iron latch, he threw the heavy door open, sword raised, ready to cleave whoever stood there in two. Instead, a small, snow-covered mass collapsed inward, falling directly against his boots. Roderick stumbled back, lowering his blade in sheer confusion. It was a woman. She was curled into a tight, agonizing ball, her lips blue, her skin pale as marble, her ragged cloak stiff with ice. But it wasn't the sight of her that paralyzed the Alpha King. It was the scent. For 15 years, Roderick's inner wolf had been a silent, comatose presence in his mind. But the moment the biting winter wind blew the scent of wild honey, petrichor, and copper, the copper of her own blood, into his face, his wolf violently awoke. It didn't just awaken, it slammed against the front of his mind, howling with a desperate, territorial possessiveness that made Roderick's knees buckle. Mate. The word echoed in his skull, ancient and undeniable. Impossible, Roderick snarled aloud, gripping the doorframe. Second-chance mates were a myth, a fairy tale spun by elders to comfort widows. Yet his chest heaved, his fangs elongating involuntarily as his eyes flashed brilliant alpha crimson. Cora let out a pitiful, rattling breath, her eyes fluttering open for a fraction of a second. She saw the massive boots, the terrifying sword, and the glowing red eyes of the man above her. "Please," she croaked, a sound barely louder than the wind. "Just a corner, near the fire." Before she could process his identity, her eyes rolled back, and she lost consciousness. Roderick's instincts entirely overrode his sworn vows. He dropped his sword, the steel clattering loudly against the stone floor, and scooped the freezing Omega into his arms. She weighed practically nothing, as her icy cheek brushed against his heated chest. A literal jolt of electricity sparked between their skin, confirming on the bond. The king, who had not allowed a woman to touch him in over a decade, found himself clutching this broken stranger as if she were the only thing tethering him to the earth. He kicked the door shut against the blizzard and carried her to the massive fur rug by the hearth. "Gideon!" Roderick roared, his alpha command shaking the very foundations of the keep. "Get in here, now!" Moments later, the heavy double doors of his study flew open. Gideon, the king's beta and chief physician, rushed in, expecting to find the king under attack. When he saw Roderick kneeling desperately over the body of a peasant woman, stripping away her frozen cloak with frantic hands, Gideon stopped dead in his tracks. "My king, you broke the seal on your quarters." "Shut your mouth and bring your medical kit," Roderick growled, his voice vibrating with a protective resonance Gideon hadn't heard in 15 years. "She's freezing to death. We need hot water, blankets, and willow bark." Gideon snapped out of his shock and hurried to assist. As they carefully cut away the ruined, icy fabric of Cora's dress to assess her frostbite, the firelight illuminated her neck and shoulder. Roderick's breath caught in his throat. There, on her collarbone, was the fresh, agonizingly raw scar of a brutally severed mate bond. His wolf whimpered in shared pain. Someone had discarded her. Someone had broken his fated mate. A murderous, consuming rage began to boil in Roderick's blood. He didn't know the Alpha who had done this, but he silently vowed to mount their head on a spike above the citadel gates. But as Gideon rolled Cora slightly to check her back for frostbite, the physician let out a sharp gasp. "Sire," Gideon whispered, his face draining of color. He pointed a trembling finger at the Omega's bare shoulder blade. Beneath the dirt and bruises, clearly visible in the firelight, was a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon pierced by a jagged dagger. It wasn't just a random shape. It was the ancient, blood-sealed crest of the House of Castile, the very same mercenary bloodline that had assassinated Queen Genevieve 15 years ago. Roderick stared at the mark, the air in the room turning suddenly, violently cold. The woman who had just awoken his dead heart, the second-chance mate sent by the moon goddess, bore the mark of his wife's murderers. The heavy silence in the king's study was broken only by the crackle of the hearth and the ragged, shallow breathing of the dying Omega. King Roderick stood frozen, his crimson alpha eyes locked onto the crescent moon and dagger birthmark on Cora's skin. The emblem of the Castile bloodline, the very mercenaries whose blades had taken Queen Genevieve's life 15 years ago. A violent war erupted within Roderick. His wolf, completely unhinged by the discovery of a fated mate, howled in absolute devotion, demanding he protect the frail woman on the floor. But the man, the grieving, traumatized king, saw only the blood of his past. He reached for the hilt of his broad sword, his knuckles turning white. "Sire, no!" Gideon, the beta physician, lunged forward, physically placing himself between the imposing king and the unconscious Cora. It was an act of treason to block the High King, but Gideon had served Roderick since they were boys. "Look at her, Roderick. Look at her age. She is 22 at most. 15 years ago, when the Queen fell, this girl would have been no more than 7 winters old. She is not an assassin." Roderick's chest heaved violently, the monstrous direwolf pelt slipping from his shoulders as he struggled for breath. The scent of wild honey and petrichor was intoxicating, warring with the bitter stench of his own panicked sweat. He dropped the sword, burying his face in his large, calloused hands. "Treat her, Gideon," Roderick rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "Heal the frostbite, bind her wounds, but place iron shackles on her wrists. When she wakes, she will answer for the mark she bears." For 3 agonizing days and nights, Cora drifted in and out of a severe fever. Gideon worked tirelessly, applying salves of crushed willow bark, yarrow, and moonflower to pull the deadly frost from her limbs. He marveled at her resilience. An ordinary Omega should have perished in the frostbite mountains, but there was an ancient, stubborn magic in her blood. On the 4th evening, Cora finally opened her eyes. The room was vast and draped in heavy velvet tapestries of dark crimson and gold. She was lying in a massive 4-poster bed, buried under mountains of furs that smelled intoxicatingly of pine, smoke, and pure alpha pheromones. Panic seized her as the memories of her rejection by Isaac rushed back. She tried to sit up, only to find a heavy iron cuff securing her right wrist to the mahogany bedpost. "You are awake." The voice came from the darkest corner of the room. Cora flinched as a massive figure stepped into the candlelight. It was the man from the door, the man whose eyes had glowed with the fires of hell. Recognizing the royal crest of Iron Peak on his tunic, her breath hitched. She was in the presence of High King Roderick Sterling, the Stone King himself. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice cracking from disuse. She instinctively tried to bow her head, wincing as the freshly healed rejection scar on her collarbone pulled tight. "Save your pleasantries," Roderick commanded, stepping closer. The sheer magnetic pull of his presence made Cora's heart hammer against her ribs. Her inner wolf, previously crushed by Isaac's cruelty, was suddenly pacing, whining with an undeniable, desperate longing. "Mate," it whispered. Roderick's jaw tightened as he caught her changing scent, the spike of desire and recognition. He forced himself to remain stoic. He pulled a chair to the bedside and slammed a heavy, leather-bound book onto the table beside her. It was open to a page displaying the Castile crest. "Tell me your name, Omega," he demanded, softly, dangerously. "Cora, sire. Once of the Silver Pine, now of nowhere. And tell me, Cora of Nowhere, how you came to bear the mark of the most notorious guild of butchers in the northern kingdoms upon your shoulder blade?" Cora stared at the drawing in the book, genuine confusion contorting her pale features. "A guild? Sire, I do not understand. It is but a birthmark. The elders of Silverpine always told me it was a curse mark from the moon goddess for being born a weak Omega." Roderick studied her face, his lie-detecting alpha senses highly attuned. Her heartbeat was erratic with fear, but there was no deception in her scent. Only profound confusion. "I was a foundling," Cora continued, her voice trembling but finding its strength. "An orphan left at the borders of Silverpine during the Great Thaw. I was raised in the scullery. I know nothing of guilds or assassins or kings. I only know the mop, the bucket, and the cruelty of an alpha who discarded me to freeze in the snow." Roderick's eyes flicked to the jagged white scar on her chest. The sight of it, the physical proof that another man had claimed and then broken her, sent a surge of blinding, possessive rage through him. His fangs involuntarily extended. "Who did this to you?" he growled, the stone walls of the chamber actually vibrating with the force of his anger. Before Cora could answer, the heavy oak doors burst open. Gideon rushed in, clutching a rolled piece of parchment, his face pale. "Forgive the intrusion, sire," Gideon panted, bowing deeply. "But we have a situation at the outer gates. Alpha Isaac of the Silverpine has arrived with an armed retinue. He claims he is hunting a fugitive who stole a priceless family heirloom, and his trackers followed her scent to our citadel." Cora let out a terrified gasp, shrinking back against the headboard, her chains rattling. "He's here," she whimpered, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "He knows I survived. He's come to finish it." Roderick looked from the terrified, broken woman bound to his bed to the frantic Beta at the door. The pieces fell into place. Isaac hadn't just rejected her. He was actively hunting her to silence her, fearing the High King's wrath for breaking the sacred Omega protection edicts. The High King slowly stood up. The internal war that had plagued him for 4 days instantly evaporated, replaced by the lethal, calculating coldness that had won him the throne. He reached out, his massive, calloused thumb gently wiping a tear from Cora's cheek. The spark of the mate bond flared between them, warm and absolute. "Gideon," Roderick said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "Remove her shackles, dress her in the silks of a royal guest, and tell Alpha Isaac I will grant him an audience in the Great Hall." The Great Hall of Iron Peak was a cavernous masterpiece of vaulted stone, its immense rafters lost in the shifting shadows high above. Banners of 100 conquered packs hung from the granite walls, their colours muted by the smoke of a dozen roaring hearth fires. At the far end of the hall, elevated on a dais of polished black marble, sat the obsidian throne. It was a massive, brutalist seat, carved directly from the volcanic rock of the mountain, a physical representation of the High King's unyielding authority. Alpha Isaac of the Silver Pine strode into this intimidating space with the arrogant, oblivious swagger of a man who believed his own fabricated reality. He was not alone. Flanking him were 4 of his elite guards, and clinging to his arm was Lady Vivian of House Harrington, his affluent and notoriously cruel betrothed. Isaac had dressed in opulent white furs and polished silver armor, expecting to find the reclusive, broken king he had heard rumors of, a monarch too buried in a 15-year grief to care about the petty squabbles of regional alphas. Roderick sat upon the throne, completely motionless, looking every inch the apex predator he was born to be. The legendary direwolf pelt was draped over his broad shoulders, and a jagged crown of twisted black iron rested upon his dark hair. The air in the room was thick, practically humming with the oppressive, suffocating weight of Roderick's alpha aura. "Alpha Isaac," Roderick's voice echoed like a crack of thunder in the silent, expectant hall. It was a voice that had ordered the slaughter of armies. "You travel far in the dead of winter. You breach my outer gates uninvited. You claim a fugitive has hidden behind my walls." Isaac bowed, a slick, practiced smile plastered on his face. He stepped forward, leaving Vivian behind. "My deepest apologies for the sudden intrusion, High King Roderick. But a matter of severe pack justice brings me to your legendary threshold. A treacherous scullery maid, an Omega named Cora, stole a sacred Harrington gemstone from my betrothed. My elite trackers followed her foul scent directly to your eastern gardens. I merely ask for your royal permission to retrieve my stolen property and enact the law of the Silver Pine." "The law of the Silver Pine," Roderick repeated slowly, tasting the words as if they were ash on his tongue. He leaned forward, resting his heavy, bearded chin on a calloused fist, his crimson eyes locked onto Isaac. "And what does the justice of your pack entail for an Omega accused of thievery?" "Execution, sire," Isaac answered, without a shred of hesitation or remorse. "To be hung from the weeping willow in the pack square, as is the ancient law." "I see." Roderick stood up with an agonizing slowness, his immense height instantly dwarfing every other warrior in the room. "Then let us have the accused face her judge. Gideon, bring forth the prisoner." From the heavy arched doorway behind the throne, Gideon, the beta physician, emerged. By his side walked Cora. The collective gasp that rippled through Isaac's retinue was entirely audible. The smug, vicious expression vanished from Vivian's face, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. Isaac physically took a step backward, his jaw going slack. Cora was no longer the freezing, mud-soaked wretch he had exiled to the blizzards. Gideon's medical care had restored the color to her cheeks, though she remained hauntingly delicate. But it was her attire that struck them speechless. She was dressed in a breathtaking, floor-length gown of midnight blue velvet, the royal colors of Iron Peak, intricately embroidered with real silver threads. Her dark hair, once matted with ice, was washed and braided with luminescent pearls. Around her neck rested a heavy, priceless choker of black diamonds. Though she was trembling slightly, she kept her chin held high, radiating a quiet, undeniable nobility that demanded the room's absolute attention. "Is this the thief you seek to hang?" Roderick asked, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register as he stepped down from the dais. "Sire, this is a trick. She is manipulative. Isaac stammered, his confident facade shattering as he felt the crushing, terrifying weight of Roderick's undivided anger zeroing in on him. "Do not speak!" Roderick roared, the concussive sound literally rattling the steel swords in the guards' scabbards. "You come into my fortress, you lie to my face, you speak of thievery and broken laws, yet the only thing stolen here was this woman's dignity, her life, and her rightful place." Isaac's eyes darted frantically, searching for an escape, and in his panic he noticed something. The velvet of Cora's gown dipped slightly at the shoulder, revealing the edge of the jagged white rejection scar, but more importantly, it exposed the dark ink of her birthmark. "Look at her shoulder!" Isaac shouted desperately, pointing a trembling finger. "High King, she bears the mark of the crescent moon and dagger. She is of the Castile bloodline, the very assassins who murdered your queen 15 years ago. She is an enemy of the crown." A deadly silence fell over the great hall. Roderick stopped in front of Cora. He did not look at the mark. He looked at the terrified Omega, his eyes softening instantly. From the shadows of the hall, a new figure stepped forward. It was Lord Silas Blackwood, the grizzled, elderly former captain of the Royal Guard, a man whose private reputation for unyielding honesty was known across the entire continent. "Alpha Isaac speaks from ignorance," Lord Silas announced, his raspy voice carrying immense weight. He unrolled a heavily sealed ancient parchment. "For 15 years we have hunted the truth of Queen Genevieve's murder. 3 days ago, we finally broke the cipher on the intercepted Southern Isle missives. The Castile Guild were not assassins. They were the Queen's sworn, secret protectors. When the true traitors attacked that night, the Castile Guard died to the last man defending her chambers. The real assassins branded the dead Castile captain to frame him." Lord Silas turned toward Cora, bowing his head respectfully. "The captain's infant daughter went missing that night, smuggled out of the bloodbath by a loyal nursemaid named Beatrice, who hid the child in the farthest, poorest reaches of the kingdom to protect her from the conspirators. Cora is not the spawn of murderers. She is the last living heir of the most loyal bloodline in Iron Peak history." Isaac fell to his knees, his mind entirely unable to process the shifting reality. No, she was just a scullery maid. The bond. She was my mate first. I swear it, I didn't know. "You rejected her," Roderick thundered, unleashing a decade and a half of repressed agony, fury, and vengeance. "You severed a sacred, fated bond for the sake of political wealth. You sent a defenseless Omega into the Frostbite Mountains to die, violating the highest, most sacred laws of our kind. You threw away a diamond to pick up a stone," Isaac whimpered, pressing his forehead directly against the freezing stone floor in a pose of absolute submission. "Mercy, my king, I beg of you, mercy." "You showed her no mercy," Roderick stated, his voice as cold as the winter raging outside. "Therefore you shall receive none. By the authority of the Obsidian Throne, I strip you of your Alpha Spark. Your lands are forfeit. Silverpine now belongs to the crown. You and your betrothed are banished to the Deadlands. You will be given no provisions, no weapons, and no cloaks. Let us see if your political alliances keep you warm when the wolves of the waste come for you." As the royal guards violently dragged the screaming, sobbing Isaac and Vivian from the great hall, the oppressive, terrifying tension finally broke. Roderick turned his back on the court. In front of the entire assembly of guards, lords, and servants, the terrifying Stone King of Iron Peak did the unthinkable. He dropped to one knee before the Omega. Gasps echoed through the rafters. Roderick took Cora's small, fragile hand in his massive ones, pressing a deeply reverent kiss to her knuckles. "For 15 long years, I believed the moon goddess had cursed me to walk in an eternal, punishing winter," he spoke, his voice vibrating with a raw, unprotected emotion meant only for her, yet witnessed by all. I was wrong. She was merely waiting for you to find your way through the snow to my door." He stood, looking down at her with a blazing, consuming devotion. "This woman is no thief. She is Cora of Iron Peak. She is my fated second-chance mate. And by the ancient laws of the moon, she is your High Queen." Later that evening, in the intimate, crackling warmth of the High King's private chambers, the final ghosts of the past were laid to rest. Roderick approached Cora, who sat upon the edge of the massive, fur-lined bed. He knelt between her knees, his large, scarred hands gently brushing the heavy velvet of her gown aside, fully exposing the jagged, agonizing white scar of Isaac's broken bond on her collarbone. "Will you let me heal this, my queen?" Roderick whispered, his thumb lightly tracing the ruined skin. "Will you let me rewrite the history they tried to steal from us?" Cora looked deeply into the eyes of the man the world called a monster, seeing only the fiercely protective, deeply loving soul underneath the stone exterior. She reached up, weaving her delicate fingers into his dark hair, and pulled him down toward her. "Yes," she breathed, her inner wolf singing a song of pure, unadulterated joy. When his lips finally met the scarred skin of her neck, a blinding, physical flash of golden light illuminated the chamber, accompanied by a wave of pure heat. The broken, agonizing scar of her past literally dissolved, the ruined flesh knitting together and shifting. In its place, blooming like a dark flower, was the intricate, beautiful mark of the Iron Peak royal crest intertwined with a crescent moon. The fated bond snapped into place, absolute, wild, and forever unbreakable. Outside the heavy oak doors, for the first time in 15 years, the relentless snow stopped falling. The bitter, howling winds of the frostbite mountains ceased their assault, and deep beneath the layers of permafrost in the King's Forbidden Gardens, the very first green shoots of spring began to violently break through the soil. The ice surrounding Iron Peak finally melted, giving way to a reign of unmatched prosperity. King Roderick and Queen Cora proved that even the deepest wounds can heal when touched by destiny. Their love story echoed through the ages, a testament to resilience and fate. Did this tale of redemption and second chances capture your heart? Like, share, and subscribe for more epic werewolf romance dramas and fantasy adventures.